Any closer to reaching a deal?
Well, we're seeking clarity because actually, with all due respect to some of the people in the president's administration, they're not legislators. So when they said we're accepting the language on testing, for example, and we're just making a light touch, they said they changed shall to may, requirements to recommendations, a plan to a strategy, not a strategic plan. They took out 55% of the language that we had there for testing and tracing. And the tracing part is so important because communities of color have been disproportionately affected by this. So on this subject where we have agreement, we don't have agreement in the language yet, but I'm hopeful. And here's the big difference. Communities of color have more deaths than the white population. Let's just think of this. If you are a child, a Hispanic child has 8 times more chance of going to the hospital with COVID than a white child. A black child, 5 times more chance of going to the hospital than that. That's because we have not addressed the problem, the testing, the tracing, the treatment, the mask wearing, the separation, the sanitation, and all that goes with it. So again, hopefully that we can learn from each other and they understand. Let me just say this. We had pages and pages of how you would do this in the minority community. They crossed it all out. Instead, they put this sentence. Contact tracing will be paid for by the federal government as part of the $75 billion. Okay, we agree with that. But given state difference, each state shall establish a strategy that is appropriate to its circumstances. CDC can provide guidance to the states on elements. Can, no, must. But in addition to that, we have to have a national plan. You cannot leave it up to the states
to decide
how they're going to address the minority community.
If you don't get that agreement, in the 48-hour deadline you said, what happens?
Well, here's the thing. The 48 only relates to if we want to get it done before the election, which we do.
Well, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, so which we do. But we're saying to them, we have to freeze the design on some of these things. Are we going with it or not? And what is the language? I'm optimistic because, again, we've been back and forth on all of this. You know legislation. Shall is different from may. And the difference amounts to this. If you think of it this simple way, when you say may, you're giving the president a slush fund. He may do this, he may grant, he may withhold. When you say shall, according to the science tell us must happen. And if we test and trace and treat, mask, separate, ventilate, sanitize, and all the rest of that, we can open our schools.
But
we
Madam
can
Speaker,
open our businesses.